Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Let me call this meeting to order. Start, as we always do, by acknowledging we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We've got some new members joining us today. Ms. Conants, nice to see you. Welcome. This is a very agreeable committee most of the time. We have our moments. And, of course, Mr. Nur Mohammed, welcome. And? Mr. Rowe. Oh, Mr. Rowe. Well, Mr. Rowe's kind of a regular, you know. We consider him one of us now, so, So, welcome to meeting number 17 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. This meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. And let me make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses, most of whom are joining us on Zoom. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Also, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And do remember our amazing interpreters who do such a great job. Don't speak too fast, and certainly don't bang around your microphones. So thank you so much for that. And pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18th, 2025, the committee resumes its study of the forestry industry. And I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We have on Zoom from the Assembly Corporation, Jeff Cape, Chief Executive Officer. Also on Zoom, Susan Yurkovich, President and Chief Executive Officer of Canfor Corporation. And in the room, we have Scott Hughes, President of Hupaco Wood Products. Thank you all for appearing today. We will begin with opening remarks, and you will have 5 minutes or less each. And Mr. Cape, we're going to start with you, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to address this urgent issue, the future of Canada's forest industry and the critical role that wood-based manufacturing housing can have. As noted, my name is Jeff Cape, and I'm the CEO of Assembly Corp. It's a company that's been around now for 7 years, a Canadian company that designs and fabricates wood buildings. The products we build are closely linked to sawmills and secondary wood manufacturers, allowing us to translate Canadian lumber into high-performance housing systems. Recently, Assembly participated in a tour of Swedish factories with the Canadian Wood Council, and through that experience, we learned a series of lessons related to how several new federal strategies in Canada here, Budget 2025, Build Canada Homes, and the Buy Canadian policy, together with the federal softwood lumber transformation and tariff response packages, can participate in solving some of our challenges. First, on the development of new value-added wood products and market diversification. The Swedish experience shows that success comes not only from advanced technologies, but also from a confidence in factory-based housing built through policy and customer experience. Factory-built houses are regarded as a higher quality product in Sweden as they are in many Northern European countries. Canada is creating similar strategies and has committed $2.2 billion to help transform the softwood lumber industry in this regard. Secondly, the importance of wood for housing and carbon neutrality. The recently launched Build Canada Homes program is mandated to scale modern methods of construction, including factory-built wood systems for housing. And it's expected to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new annual demand for Canadian wood products as it deploys its initial $13 billion investment. The softwood transformation agenda should be fully integrated with this plan. Thirdly, regarding public procurement, Canada must move from short-term programs to a platform for industrialized construction and economic development. The Build Canada Homes program will prioritize multi-year shovel-ready housing projects that use Canadian wood and the Buy Canadian policy framework to require federal contracts to prioritize Canadian materials, including lumber. To make this real, I believe the procurement needs to commit to multi-year pipeline of manufactured housing projects to help incentivize the capitalization of factory programs. It needs to create a strategic industrialization fund with federal loan guarantees to de-risk private investment. And I'm aware that BTC is considering this, but within the ISED family, there are other channels at Industry Canada to support this industry strategy. And it also has to reform RFPs and payment terms, the contract structures for these suppliers, so they can get paid a meaningful share during the manufacturing process and not just on delivery of housing. So there are a series of policy initiatives that need to be made to help facilitate this industry's growth. On the forest management issue and this notion of vertical integration, Canada has begun to pivot from raw log exports towards forest to factory to housing model. And the federal softwood package includes loan guarantees and funding to incentivize and increase domestic processing, including support for Indigenous forestry businesses and an opportunity to diversify products and markets, all of which should be linked to housing demand. Respecting the provincial and territorial jurisdictions, I think the next big step on that in this regard is to harmonize codes and to help fast track approvals for certified factories using tools like CSA 277. And by pairing digital permitting and pre-approved designs, Canada can reduce interprovincial barriers and allow factory-approved wood housing to move more rapidly across jurisdictions. And finally, on workforce, on the need for training in workforce, the sector needs targeted investments in training for offsite construction, industrialized design, and logistics. Federal workforce and transition programs, along with Budget 25 skills investments, can be directed towards regional manufacturing hubs and high-profile projects to build skilled employment. I'll end with this kind of view that the effects on the Canadian lumber industry could be enormous. Federal policies such as those under the Build Canada Homes Initiative emphasize certified Canadian wood systems. And if this becomes the norm, the lumber industry could, and this is the negative, I'll begin with the negative, I'll end with the positive. The lumber industry could see a decrease in per unit use of wood by 20 to 30% due to the efficient use of wood and engineered products and the optimization of material. But over the next 5 to 10 years, the mass timber market should grow by well in excess of $1 billion. And in the process, help cut embodied carbon by 40%. And yep.
Thank you for ending on that positive note. And
always good.
And now we're going to go on to Ms. Yurkovich. You have 5 minutes or less. Thank you, Mr. Cate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to share some views on behalf of CAMFOR as part of your study. I think looking at your record, I know you've heard from a number of people about the importance of forestry to the Canadian economy, the 200,000 direct jobs the sector supports, and the families and communities across our country that make a living and a good life in the forest products industry. And I think you've also heard about the critical importance of securing a trade agreement with the U.S. So that Canadian producers can fairly access our largest market. I share these views and like to complement them with a few thoughts from CAMFOR's perspective. Canadian Forest Products, or CANFOR, is proudly headquartered in Vancouver, BC. Our company started out as a single family-owned sawmill on the banks of the Fraser River in the 1930s, initially employing about 28 people. And now, nearly 9 decades later, CANFOR has grown into one of Canada's largest diversified forest products companies, employing 2,700 people in Canada and operating globally, including facilities in the U.S. South and in Sweden. In BC and Alberta, our operations include 8 sawmills, 2 pulp mills, specialty paper and lumber facilities, a tree nursery, and a green energy plant. And success in our sector depends on 2 critical things: secure, predictable access to sustainably grown timber and secure, reliable access to markets, most notably the U.S., our largest trading partner. For decades, however, our sector has faced unfair duties that harm both Canadian workers and U.S. consumers. As a mandatory respondent in the seemingly endless rounds of softwood lumber dispute, our company has spent thousands of hours and millions of dollars on litigation. We are one of the largest duty payers, having paid cash deposits now totaling more than $1 billion since 2016. And with our combined duty rate now at 57.6%, we expect to pay more than $100 million again in 26. So without question, this is placing a tremendous financial burden on our company and companies across the country. We acknowledge and appreciate the significant efforts of the Government of Canada and the Embassy in Washington to advance our interests with the administration and work towards a new agreement. We also recognize the challenges involved in getting to the negotiating table and know that U.S. protectionism on softwood is a bipartisan issue, and we have faced duties with both Republican and Democratic administrations alike. So to mitigate the impacts of U.S. duties and tariffs, we're focused on things that we can control, deriving more value from our operations, controlling costs, operating safely, and exploring ways to retool some of our Canadian operations to create higher value products for customers and for here and around the world. And while we are controlling what we can, we also believe that there are actions the government can take to support companies in the near term and offer the 5 following recommendations. First, we appreciate the loan programs introduced by the federal government to support liquidity, including measures to aid workers. Meaningful, easy to access, and provide immediate relief. Second, as we assess the potential investments in our Canadian operations that could further diversify products and markets, federal support could be instrumental in making this possible. Establishing a federal capital investment fund could expedite projects to retool facilities to create higher value-added products and expand into markets that are not subject to duties and tariffs. We're assessing potential investments in both our BC and Alberta operations that could benefit from such a fund and would welcome the opportunity to discuss how a program like this could be structured. Third, as a market leader in exports to Asia and a company that operates in Canada, the U.S., and Europe, our team has a strong understanding of global opportunities for Canadian wood products. We support intensified overseas marketing and diversification efforts across all industries, including forestry, and believe that restoring meaningful funding for market expansion initiatives is required to support this effort. We would also encourage the inclusion of the forest sector in any future Team Canada trade missions. Fourth, as government works to streamline approvals for major nation-building projects, we'd urge a similar approach for all industries working on the land base. We note the announcement of a new task force for the forest sector, which represents an opportunity to assess cost competitiveness, productivity, regulatory burden, and streamline permitting both federally and provincially. And we'd be happy to contribute to this work, but are mindful of the need for urgency. This work must yield outcomes and not simply be more thought and study. And finally, the Canada Revenue Service could help our sector by expediting corporate tax refunds for 2024's tax year. Canfor filed our return in June of 25, and we are still awaiting a refund. And issuing refunds as early as possible would provide immediate liquidity that could help us pay the significant duty obligations we face today and in the months ahead. Thanks for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yurkovich. And now we're going to go on to Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, honourable members, colleagues from across the forestry value chain, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Scott Hughes, and I'm second-generation owner of Upaco Wood Products Limited. Canada's forest sector employs 600,000 direct and indirect jobs and is the economic backbone of nearly 300 communities. Yet, we are losing ground in global markets. If we want a strong, sustainable industry today and beyond, we must act decisively on 6 fronts. The first, countervailing and anti-dumping duties. The United States has imposed duties averaging over 20% on Canadian softwood lumber for decades, with the latest round, I thought it was 35, but I was corrected, it's now 57.6%. These duties have already cost our industry more than $7 billion since 2017 alone. The raised housing costs in the United States shrink our market share and force more curtailments and permanent closures from British Columbia to Atlantic Canada. This is the longest-running trade dispute in North American history. Over 40 years and 5 fur trade wars, Canada has won the legal argument at least 15 times at NAFTA, CUSMA, and the World Trade Organization panels. Yet every time we win, the U.S. lobby restarts the clock. We must keep fighting legally, but we also must negotiate a long-term managed trade agreement that finally ends this cycle. Anything less is surrender. Second, the federal government's role in market diversification and value-added production. Yes, we must diversify. Europe, Japan, South Korea, India, the Middle East, but let's be crystal clear. We cannot simply switch markets and walk away from the United States. The United States takes 75% of everything we cut. No other market or combination of markets can absorb that volume in the next 5, 10, or even 15 years. Mills will close, towns will hollow out, and thousands of families will lose their livelihoods long before new export corridors mature. Retooling a single mid-sized sawmill to produce European-spec lumber and pallets costs $50 to $100 million and takes 18 to 24 months, money and time that many producers do not have, where duties are eaten at the cash flow. Meanwhile, Brazil is already shipping European-spec pine and pallets into the European Union at 20 to 30% lower cost than us. Diversification is not a life support, it's a long-term growth strategy. In the short and medium term, our survival still depends on regaining full, duty-free access to the American market. This is why aggressive negotiation with Washington must remain job one. Everything else, value-added funds, trade missions, retooling grants is vital, but it buys us time, but does not buy us survival. Third, the unique importance of urban housing and carbon neutrality. For over 20 years, I worked hand in hand with architects and engineers across Ontario designing roof trusses and floor systems for single-family homes, townhouses, and low-rise buildings. My job is to squeeze every last board foot out of a load of lumber so families can afford a safe, high-quality home. I know firsthand that wood is the most versatile, cost-effective, and climate-friendly building material that we have. A typical 2,000-square-foot family home built with Canadian lumber stores about 30 tons of carbon dioxide. A 20-story mass timber tower sequesters about 3,500 tons, the same as taking 900 cars off the road for a year. If we simply raise the share of wood-frame single-family homes, mid-rise, and tall wood buildings from today's roughly 12% to 30% by 2035, we will cut millions of tons of emissions while creating tens of thousands of rural jobs. Yet, right now, a home builder is the single largest consumer of Canadian dimensional lumber after pallets and crates are being strangled by red tape. We cannot hit our housing targets or our climate targets unless we fast-track builders who choose wood. Give them presumptive approval for proven systems and stop treating renewable Canadian lumber as if it was a problem instead of a solution. Fourth, a national public procurement policy that favors wood. A simple wood-first policy for federally funded buildings would create stable domestic demand and show real leadership on climate and jobs. Fifth, sustainable forest management practices. Canadian forests are among the best managed on Earth. Over 90% of harvested areas are promptly regenerated, and over 160 million hectares are third-party certified. Good management keeps the forest healthy in a changing climate. We need to tell that story loudly and proudly. Sixth, and finally, to respect provincial and territorial jurisdictions. Forests are constitutionally provincial. Ottawa sets national goals and provides funding and coordination, never micromanagement. Real progress only happens when we work with true partners. In closing, we stand at crossroads. We can keep bleeding jobs while we wait for new markets that would take a generation to build, or we can fight like hell to keep the U.S. market open while we diversify, innovate, and build more Canadian homes, pallets, wood packaging, and other wood products with Canadian wood. The choice is ours, and the time is now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hughes. Thank you to all of our presenters. We're now going to go on to our rounds of questions. We're going to start with Mr. Tucker for 6 minutes. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you for our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Kapp, I understand you're zooming in. Are you at home by chance, or is that at the office?
This is at home.
At home. And do you live in one of these prefab factory homes?
No,
That's okay. Many Canadians
yet.
don't. And as much as the Brookfield model and the business that they're trying to push is popular with some people, most Canadians have concern. Switching to Mrs. Jurevich, I understand the decades that it took to build your company, family-owned business in British Columbia, And could you characterize what the last 10 years have been like for families that are employed with your company?
Well, it's been it's challenging to be working in the forest sector. It's faced it's a very competitive business, as you know, and of course we have at least we've had periods of managed trade and we've had very few moments of free trade, but mostly we've been operating under a tariff regime, which makes it extremely challenging. It requires our companies to be extremely cost focused and also to try and remain competitive to be able to serve our customers and to be able to continue to compete in a global space.
So
It's meant
for the last 10 years, have there been that many raises for the workers?
while we try and keep pace with the market. So yes, we've had adjustments, but it's still we continue to employ highly skilled workers and we pay them fairly, but we have fewer workers for sure in Canada because of the challenges of operating here.
And you said decades. So let's compare that to the decade prior. So before 2015, what was that decade like? Because you did reference decades. Was that a better decade?
Well, in British Columbia, where we has been traditionally where we started our business and where the heart of our business has been for many generations, we have of course experienced a very significant shift in the availability of fiber, mostly because of the mountain pine beetle epidemic, followed by very difficult fire seasons. So the cut has come down substantially in the province of British Columbia.
So, but just comparing those two decades, you're saying that the last 10 years have been better than those conservative government years that had tariff peace with the states and especially with softwood lumber deal?
Well, we had very good years during COVID. Everyone knows that. We had a black swan event where we had very strong lumber markets. So that would have been something that was unseen in the industry. Ever.
And just talking a little bit about the American negotiation, you said that we had troubles negotiating a deal with, it was nonpartisan is the verbiage I believe you used, the Republican and Democrats, but that's been under the past Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney hasn't been able to get a deal under either one, correct?
The last softwood lumber agreement we had was done under Prime Minister Harper.
In what year was that?
It ran from 2006 to 2015, and then there was a standstill period for 1 year, and then this latest round, Lumber 5, we affectionately call it, started in 2017.
So I would assume that you would say the last decade was better than the previous 2 decades ago was better than the last decade.
Duties is not the only thing that makes the business good or difficult, but we had a lumber agreement between 2006 and 2016, which creates some stability. And I would say that we had very good years during the COVID years, and then we've had, challenging markets, a lot of uncertainty, and very high duties currently.
All right. Switching gears to our witness that's in the room, thank you so much for being here today. We talked about this last decade, the lost decade under the Liberals. What was your experience with the workers that have experienced these 2 decades, along the same vein as comparing those 2 decades?
Okay, that's a very difficult answer to give. The industry I'm in, which is the wood packaging industry, fluctuates depending on demand, and our clients, most of them, cater to the U.S. market. It's hard to say whether or not things were better under Harper or better under Trudeau. I mean, we've had good years under Trudeau, we've had good years under Harper. But this latest round has resulted in almost an 80% loss in business for me, and that's significant.
Any years like that under the Conservative government?
If I recall correctly, we probably had some turmoil back in the I believe it was around 2010, give or take, when we had that world crisis with the economy worldwide.
Yeah.
We managed to get through it without too much of an impact.
Right. And how would you characterize when you heard Mark Carney promise a deal by July 21st? Was that encouraging news when you heard the Prime Minister say that?
It was encouraging news. but what I was seeing from my customers was a decline in orders. So
Thank
this
you,
started before the promise was made.
Thank you both.
And not kept.
We are going to go on to Mr. Danko for 6 minutes. Mr. Danko.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Mr. Cape. You spoke in your opening remarks about Buy Canadian. Of course, the federal government is committed to Buy Canadian policy, and we're also expecting provincial governments to follow suit. But really, a lot of construction happens at the municipal level, whether it's rec centers or housing projects, and also private sector and institutional. So I'm interested in what recommendations you would have to ensure that private sector, institutional, and municipal projects are also using primarily Canadian products.
Thank you. I mean, there's no doubt that right now the industry is struggling with the demand side problems. So a substantial push will come with the federal commitment. The Build Canada Homes initiative under the Carney government is going to kind of, I expect it will catalyze the industry and begin to create some forward momentum. The showcasing of both modular and wood housing under this kind of new approach to fabricated offsite construction, I think should create confidence and create the momentum in the private sector to move in this direction. Typically, the private sector is slow in this regard. They're governed under heavy banking relationships and contract structures that inhibit them in a strange way, that more so than, say, government has the opportunity to operate. And so I think the federal policy around procurement should catalyze and prime the pump, so to speak, for private markets to then follow suit.
Thank you. Second question is for Ms. Yurkovich. Canfor is known to have a very diversified market share. In particular, I heard in your opening remarks that you actually have facilities in Sweden, so you're selling to a global market, including in Sweden, who is, of course, a world leader. And you spoke about support programs for retooling facilities so that Canadian producers can be more competitive on mass timber, engineered wood products on the global stage. So I want to give you an opportunity to expand on what that framework would look like and what you need from the federal government to make that happen.
Thanks. I think what we'd like to be able to do is go higher up the value chain. We are dimension lumber producers. We have a lot of dimension. We also have specialty, but there's opportunities for us to further go up the value chain and look for market opportunities that would be duty exempt or which would apply to markets that don't have tariffs or duties. The challenge for us is, as you can imagine, when you have $1 billion on deposit, that's money that's not being spent on plant and equipment. That's sitting over in the U.S. Treasury or wherever it sits. And it's not able, we don't have access to it to invest in plant and equipment and our people. And so capital, as you can imagine, is extremely constrained. So as we look at these opportunities at a time to diversify away from the U.S. or some of our production away from the U.S., it's a time when we don't have a lot of capital to spend. In fact, we are looking at every single dime, and of course, as many other companies are. So having some kind of matching fund or grant or forgivable loan that allowed us to retool some of our operations to be able to meet, to go into those additional product areas or to diversify further away from the United States would be really helpful and would, I think, be a way for us to transition. As we talk about Build Canada Homes, these are other things that allow us to find different markets and move our product to areas that are duty-free.
Thank you. And just a follow-up on that. I'm sure you've done detailed market sector evaluations. So I'm curious if you would like to share what markets you see as having the most potential and what products in those markets do you see as preferable?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging and it moves a lot. I mean, we used to send a lot of our product into, when we had more low-grade beetle-impacted wood, we sent a lot of our product into China, but the that's changed. Obviously, we have moved through the beetle impacted wood or salvage wood, and we are now into more green stands. And so those are higher value stands, and we want to take that fiber and maximize the value we can derive from it. And of course, geopolitical shifts have occurred. There are sanctions on Russian wood and Belarusian wood, and so those avenues are, the avenues for them are closed. That wood does flow into China, and of course that creates a challenge for us moving in there because it's a very price sensitive market, and of course when they have access to that wood, that can change things. So there are other opportunities. There's more opportunities even with the declining population in Japan. We're switching more from traditional post and beam construction to 2x4 construction. Someone mentioned schools and rec centers. We think that that's an area where seniors' homes, institutional buildings where it has, we build homes with wood, but there are more opportunities to do it in that space. And so those are the things that we are pursuing, as well as some other higher value products that are used in, decorative applications, et cetera.
Thank you. And
That's your time.
that's my
Mr.
time.
Danko.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And it is now Monsieur Simard's turn.
Merci.
6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the sake of our witnesses, I'm just going to give you a few seconds to make sure that your headset is working and that you can hear the lovely voices of the interpreters. Can you hear them? Yes, good. So before I start out, I just want to make sure that you know that when in English you say pellet, it's granule, because pallets are not pellets, and in French it's a different word. Anyway, moving on. I have a question for Ms. Yurkovich. Earlier, you referred to retooling the forestry sector. You also spoke about developing new markets. These are things that take time. And I'm saying this for this reason. I'm going to speak to you about an idea, and then we'll come back to this retooling and developing of new markets. There is a proposal that was brought forward by several players in the forestry industry in Quebec, by unions, etc. And the idea is a simple one. They're calling on the government to, at the end of the month, recover 50% of those countervailing and anti-dumping duties that are paid out to the states. And in that way, the government will get the rest of it at the end of the trade dispute. So we're not saying we want all of it back. We're not going to get all of that captive money, or up to about $11 billion. So I'd like to hear from you and from the other witnesses if you would agree with that idea. That is to say that 50% of those countervailing and anti-dumping duties are brought back, recovered at the end of each month, starting with you, Ms. Yurkovich.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. And yes, I did read through the transcripts, and I understand that that is an idea that has been floated. And I think we consider it. We've looked at all kinds of things and are looking at things that sort of balance trade risk with meaningful assistance for the industry. And I totally agree with you, sir, that it takes time to develop markets and build houses, et cetera. And so I think when we look for, from our perspective, we think, there's a variety of different programs that are going to be appropriate for companies. Our industry is very diverse. We have big companies, we have medium companies, we have small companies, and it's an ecosystem. We all live, we coexist, and we need each other. And so each company is going to have things that are better suited to them. From our perspective, that would be not something that, we would particularly pursue, but we understand that some companies are pursuing that. The things that we are looking at are things that are going to allow us to transform and to thrive going forward. And I think, our focus is on, not transitioning away from the forest sector. We have to transition, and and that's going to take some time. So supporting some workers while we do this transition and helping us do these retoolings are the things that we would prefer from our, being a company of our scale and scope.
Peut-être je vais continuer puis je donne.
I'm just going to continue, and I would ask the other witness if they have answers as well to provide, if they could submit that in writing, because I have very little time. I'd like to come back to something else you said earlier on, Ms. Yurkovich. You spoke about some very interesting measures that might be of interest to the government because they don't cost anything, and governments always like things that don't cost anything. And it's this idea of accelerating the reimbursements, the refunds that you should be getting from the CRA. What amount of money does that represent? Because for you, that represents liquidity that would help you, doesn't it? For a business like your own, how much money would that represent?
For us, it's about $65 million, which then levers some provincial returns as well. So in total, it'd be about $80 million for us. And when you think about what we're paying in duties, that's very significant. That would help us. And I agree with you. Like, I think that's something that, it doesn't cost money. It's due back to us through our properly filed returns. And so that would be something that I would be grateful if the government could take a look at.
Je suppose que par le passé,
I assume that in the past you've made requests for financial support to the federal government, whether it be through your production chain, your processing chain, retooling. Have you ever in the past received any responses to the demands you've put to the federal government?
Are you asking me, sir?
tout à fait, oui.
Yes.
Well, I think the government has responded. They've created a loan program, which was announced a couple of weeks ago. One through BDC and then a larger one, so that's available. And of course, we have been very focused on.
Désolé de vous couper.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. What I want to do is ask you if in the past did you receive any answers? For example, when you needed access to liquidity, or did you ever have access to any sort of funding to develop new technologies, new markets? So before the announcement of the BDC. Did you ever have access to anything on the part of the federal government when it comes to support for the forestry industry?
Yes, there's been programs for market diversification, IFIT to help the pulp and paper industry. There have been programs that have been available.
Okay, that brings our first round of questions to a close. We're going to go on to the second round. Nous commencerons avec Monsieur Martel.
And we will begin with Mr. Martel. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Ms. Yurkovich. Just to circle back to what my colleague was saying, you were speaking about speeding up these refunds. How much time does it usually take when you need those or want those refunds before you end up getting them?
That's a question that I cannot answer. I just know that and I could get that answer to you, sir, but I know that we have made several inquiries and have been told that there's a number of reviews going on related to another program. And so we won't have access to those until that review is complete. So we have asked, and we've already sent a letter in to Minister Hodgson with respect to that.
Merci. Ma prochaine question.
Next question is for Mr. Hughes. Over the past few years, the lumber industry has gone through some very difficult times. Everyone knows that. There's been an absence of a new deal. Could you tell us, how has this affected your own operations and those of your colleagues?
Okay. What's recently happened is my customer base, which are other manufacturers that are shipping product to the United States or to the rest of the world, the orders have dropped significantly, about an 80% drop. With other companies, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But the biggest impact is the American customers are not buying our products. So my products that are going to the other manufacturers are not being used.
Oui, vous avez parlé de bureaucratie.
You referred to bureaucracy. Can you give us some concrete examples of how heavy that bureaucracy is?
Que voulez-vous dire par bureaucratie?
Being said on the interpretation.
Le fait que il faut, pour avoir droit sur...
Well, in order to have access to funding or subsidies, it can take a long time. You have to you have to actually meet several criteria.
Is that correct? Because I can't quite understand what's being said on the...
Oui. Oui.
Yes.
Not really ask for subsidies to help our industry. The last subsidy that we actually got was to upgrade our lighting system to a more energy efficient thing. But most of the equipment that we buy is all self-financed. We don't get any subsidies or rebates from the government for them. That's what you're asking.
Madame Yurkovich, je voudrais juste revenir. Vous
Ms.
avez dit...
Yurkovich, you mentioned that during COVID, the times were very good for the forestry industry. Can you tell me why it was such a good, why those were such good times for the forestry industry? I know there weren't necessarily any duties at the time, but...
Well, COVID wasn't a good time for any of us from a global perspective in terms of life and business. But what it did is constrain supply chains. And of course, everybody went home and they started to do projects like redo their deck or finish their basement or create space for themselves to work from home. So at that time, prices shot up to a level that we have never seen before. Lumber prices went up to $1,600 per 1,000 board feet, which was just extraordinary, and I don't expect we will see again ever, hopefully, not in my lifetime. And that has it went very far up, and now it has come back down very significantly. But obviously, prices running up meant we had very good markets for a period of 18 months to 24 months, and then, of course, it fell.
Monsieur Hogg,
Mr. Hughes, several businesses in your sector have mentioned that the combination of duties and other amounts like carbon pricing make accumulative costs prohibitive. Can you tell us how that has affected your own competitiveness and productivity?
That being put into place have driven up the cost of lumber, the cost of shipping. It's very hard to break down what the actual costs are. I'll have to look into that a little bit more and get back to you in writing.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to go on to Mr. Gay for 5 minutes. Mr. Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Cape, I just want to tell you that we've heard you, and I hope it's going to be in our recommendation in terms of paying you through the building and factory. You're not the first to mention that. One question I have for you, and after that for Mrs. Yurkovich, is the government in budget 2025 has announced the super deduction that we call it for additional tooling for productivity, new equipment, to be able to write it off in the first year. Is this something you're taking advantage of? And if not, why not? Mr. Kidd.
Yes, it's very important. I mean, the capital investments we need to make as a company are in the order of magnitude of $20 million for equipment, and probably the same again in the factory the factory building and infrastructure. So the opportunity to write that down quickly is a big advantage.
Mrs. Yurkovich?
We would take advantage of anything that supported our capital program, capital investment.
Mrs. Yurkovich, one of the another measure that was put in place, there's a $500 million that was allocated for the next fiscal year for programs for helping transformation, new equipment, new products, training, employees. Is that something you've looked into or started to inquire about?
Yeah, we saw the announcement, and we're of course, it's relatively new. We're looking for details of all the things that were recently announced, including the ones that I think were announced last week, perhaps, or a little while ago, 10 days. All the days blend together, but around transportation, around the availability for those kinds of programs, we are looking for details, and I expect we will hear more from the line ministries in the next, few weeks. So obviously, those would be things that we would be interested in.
And I'm curious, Mr. Cape actually mentioned his trip to Sweden in terms of learning, but you actually operate in Sweden. What can we learn from that market?
Yes, we've expanded. We moved into Sweden in about 2019. And if you're a global company, you want to continue to serve your customers. As your customers are big and global, you want to be able to have the products and be able to serve them. I would say that, there's quite a few things that are different about Sweden. Where it's located is one. It has access to many, many markets. Obviously, freight and logistics is a big thing when you are producing a product like ours. You're shipping it a long way if you're shipping it to Europe, where they have access to many, many markets, whether it's in Europe, in the European Union, in the UK, in Middle East, North Africa, and even into the US East Coast. So they have a lot more market diversity. They also have highly specialized products that are sort of country specific. And so we have more product diversification there. And we have very secure fiber, very good and secure fiber there as well.
Thank you. Mr. Cape, I'm coming back to you. You talked about training the workforce as an important topic for you. And I'm assuming, do you mean for tradespeople? Because in the budget, there is quite a bit of money for the different trades organization. Are we talking electrician, plumbers, or general? What are we talking about here, and do you think you can take advantage of that?
Oh, I know we can take advantage of it, and we've had a number of discussions with the various unions, trade unions in the Ontario area to understand what they think needs to happen. But yeah, these are both skilled and unskilled trade interests. The Carpentries Union alone is a useful partner in all of this work. The production of offsite housing is a different way of building, and there's a transitional process required there, but it's a manageable process and one that shouldn't take too long and creates a safer, more predictable employment opportunity with less risks for life safety and job security. So it's a worthwhile endeavor to engage in this.
Thank you.
Programs.
We're going to go on to Monsieur Simard at 2.5 minutes.
You have 2.5 minutes, MP Simard. Thank you very much. Mr. Cape, in your opening remarks, you spoke about your prefab production, and the government apparently is rolling out a huge program called Build Canada Homes. And we saw the government's program that was for access to liquidity. There were some failures there. Now it appears that it's easier to access that program. But I'm wondering about this program before it's rolled out, or before it is rolled out. Were you consulted on this Build Canada Homes program? Did you have any discussions with them? Because you're involved in prefab production, I would think that the government would want to hear your perspective before they roll out a program. Did you have any discussions with the department?
Participate with a series of consultations, but we also took the initiative to organize a group of about 106 companies from across Canada related to the supply chain associated with prefabricated housing, and 106 companies organized over a 3 to 4 month period and designed a series of 19 recommendations for short-term recommendations and 17 long-term recommendations. They were addressed comprehensively in the policy put forward in the budget.
Est-ce que c'est possible pour vous de fournir...
Would it be possible for you to provide the committee with the names of the businesses involved and the recommendations, the short-term and the long-term recommendations? And can you give us perhaps a little taste of them now? Maybe just tell us what some of the main recommendations were?
Yeah, happy to supply that. Some of the simple recommendations relate to procurement, which is, mandate the requirement or wood first as a priority in the procurement. Another would be to align policies across the country and across different political jurisdictions, municipal, provincial, and federal, to enable the faster approval processes. A third was to focus to create not just market pull through procurement, but also market push to incentivize the federal government through BDC to invest in building the industry with an economic development agenda.
Très rapidement, parce que Monsieur le Président est très gentil.
Very quickly, just because the chair is so patient, it would be terrific if you could table the recommendations so that we can include some of those in our final report. Thank you, Mr. Simard.
You have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. My first question is for Mr. Hughes. Last week, our witness explained the uncertainty in the industry, and he's saying that the uncertainty was so bad that they'd rather have a bad deal now than a good deal later. And I was wondering if you could explain the struggles that's in your industry and the uncertainty and the struggles that come from the uncertainty from investors and whatnot, and how urgent to get a deal is.
Well, I'm not exactly saying to take a bad deal as opposed to a good deal. What I'm saying is I don't think there's enough effort on behalf of the Canadian representatives and negotiating with Washington.
Yeah, and we heard the message that it was going to. We heard the message that it was going to be speeds that we've never seen before, and building things and moving things at speeds we've never seen before. It must have been very disappointing to hear our Prime Minister say, "Who cares?" I mean, it's a detail. I've spoke with him, and I'll speak with him again when it matters, when we're talking about trade deals. Does those kind of statements build a little bit of trust and certainty for investors in Canada as well?
Well, I've decided a long time ago not to take a lot of faith in politicians' promises. And although it was nice to hear, I knew it was not going to be possible at the speeds that he was promising. It was unrealistic. I know negotiating with the Trump administration is going to be tough, but the businessmen, and as businessmen are well aware, you have to pull up your pants and discuss it and come up with a solution that works for both parties. Yeah. Sometimes it means a great deal. Sometimes it means a deal that's not so good. Sometimes it's going to be bad deals.
Yeah. And you talk about, making a deal and getting to that point. And you've talked about in the past, and you mentioned that we win in these court cases that we've had in the past. With the Americans, we typically win those court cases. But do the companies like yourself, do they get reimbursed and for the struggles that they've went through? Or are they left out to have to deal with it on their own? Or is the damage already done?
Okay, well, my industry is not shipping directly to United States. We're not dealing with United States. We're dealing with other manufacturers that are putting their products in my wood package and shipping them to United States. Yeah. So the taxes or the duties don't really impact us. It impacts our customers, which in turn results in lower orders.
Yeah, you're left out in the cold, as some may say, and it's very tough to get that. So when it comes, you talked about just diverting to Europe and the struggles that there is with that, and you mentioned, feel free to build on that, but you also mentioned that Brazil is selling to the EU for 20 to 30% less. Why is it? How are they able to do that in this market?
Brazil is able to do it because they started producing European spec lumber many years ago. Brazil's biggest market is the European Union. So Canada's biggest market is the United States. So it's two completely different markets that we're dealing with. So for us to pivot, it's going to take us time and it's going to take a lot of money and effort.
Yeah. So do you think that like lot of regulations and all the red tape that we have and the industrial carbon tax for harvesting the wood products and all that, do you think that plays into it, or is it mostly just that they've been ahead of the game?
I believe it does.
Yes. So I just got one last question for you, and the Conservatives have been very adamant that we can improve the environment and reduce carbon emissions at the same time while supporting industry such as forestry, especially the forestry industry. And last week there was a Liberal MP who was on this committee, and I won't say his name out of respect, but he chuckled and alluded that our Conservative idea of increasing forestry to improve the environment is just silly. And I've seen that you've mentioned in your presentation about the carbon capture and the potential of actually helping the environment through proper forest management. And I'm wondering if you could set the record straight and talk more on how proper forest management can help our environment and reduce CO2 emissions to help climate change.
Okay, Canada sits on one of the largest forests in the world. We had a very good program managing our forestry. The association that I belong to has fought many battles over the years related to people that did not think that using trees was very smart. I don't know if you remember many years ago we were dealing with an issue with the spotted owl, which basically caused lumber production to slow down considerably because people are worried about the dangers. Now it's been proven that the forestry industry is actually very good for this country. The more we cut down, the more we grow, the better it is in terms of carbon storage, in terms of better environmental issues. But the forestry industry has to be on the ball with it. We have to maintain these forests properly. We have to ensure that fires are minimized as much as possible. Some of the information we've been getting, we've heard that more than 50% of the forest fires have been started by arson. Whether that's true, I don't know, but it's a very disturbing number.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Thank you to all of our...
Monsieur le Président.
Oh,
Excusez, Monsieur le
sorry.
Président.
Chair? Mr. Chair? I just want to make sure that Ms. Yurkovich can provide us with the time that it took to get her refund. Ms. Yurkovich, can you provide that information to the committee? And you also mentioned a letter to the minister. Could we also receive that from you?
Clerk, and we'll respond to the best of our ability. My apologies, Mr. Nur Mohammed. You know, it's a pleasure to have you on the committee this afternoon, and I apologize. Yeah, this isn't the first time this has happened when I've had a lapse, but committee members are so forgiving, and I hope you will be too.
Absolutely.
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And Ms. Yurkovich, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you since your BC Hydro days. It's nice to see you. I want to start with Mr. Cape. You talked about the work that's being done in modular housing. I just wanted to talk a little bit because my friend opposite seemed quite condescending in respect of the modular homes that you are building. And I just wanted to point out that Ontario, under Premier Ford, Premier Moe in Saskatchewan, my friend's home province, Premier Houston, Premier Smith, Premier Lance, these are all conservative premiers. They have put in between them over $50 or $60 million in recent months into building modular housing. Note it's a big part of the housing strategy for their regions. In fact, there are companies like True North Homes, Prairie Castle, Laser Homes, Grunter Homes, all of which are from Saskatchewan. So, Mr. Cape, when you hear the type of misinformation or denigration of modular homes that are being built to create homes quickly for Canadians, and you hear this misinformation, what concerns does it pose for companies like yours that are doing this work when the entire industry and the work that you're doing is somehow misrepresented or seen to be less than other types of housing?
Yeah, it is misinformation. It's unfortunate because it kind of harkens back to the portable classroom in a schoolyard, or these kind of tin can type trailer park homes. And the reality is, I would prefer to live in a manufactured homes. They are the preferred choice in Sweden because they're higher quality. I'm in an 120-year-old house that leaks a lot, and I've got little breezes in virtually every corner, especially on cold days. The building envelope and the R value, the energy efficiency for a passive light house that we are building is a superior product in every regard. And that is a preferred solution for most people. And quite frankly, that is one of the stigmas we need to move beyond as quickly as we can, is to establish the high quality of these units.
And I want to give you a little bit more time to respond to this, because a number of these companies are based in Saskatchewan, the home province of my friend opposite, who made some of these comments. What would you say to Canadians that are watching this, apart from what you've already said about the importance of supporting these Canadian companies that are doing great work in this space?
Well, I'd say that, Canadians used to build housing by chopping down logs in a forest and squaring off the logs. And then we learned about 2x4s and dimensional lumber. And all we're talking about is taking the next level of completion in a factory in a predictable space, making a higher quality product. It's economic development. It's productivity that the country needs. We as a nation are known to be good quality house builders. This is just taking the next step to be global leaders.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Yurkovich, if I could just switch to you now.
Point of order, Chair. This is like almost an advertisement for portable homes from Brookfield. That's debate, Mr. Tucker, as you know. And so we'll go back to Mr. Nur Mohammed. You have 1 minute and 48 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take those 4 seconds back as well, if I might. Mrs. Yurkovich, I just wanted to lean in a little bit on some of the challenges, of course, we're facing in British Columbia. As you pointed out, there's, as we all know, there's lots of dollars, billions of dollars that are now sitting in abeyance as a result of duties and tariffs. Can you perhaps walk some of the members of the committee through that may not be as familiar, some of the issues that are provincial in nature that have to be dealt with in respect to supporting the industry more substantially? Where can provinces be doing more to ensure that they are making it easier for your industry and the workers that you employ?
Sure. I think what we have opportunity to address is the hosting conditions. It's a very competitive marketplace, and I think what we could have is a focus on regulatory regimes, and we want to have good, strong regulation. That's what we want as Canadians. We want to have good, sustainable forest practices, which we do. But I think there's an opportunity for us to streamline permitting, to reduce duplication of some of the regulation that we have, and to create more hosting conditions that allow us to compete on the global marketplace. And of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, the most important thing is access to fiber. And so we do have a cut that stands at about, based on the Chief Forester's, the Chief Forester sets the allowable annual cut, and we are not cutting up to that level. We're about half of that right now, and so that's putting a real strain in terms of accessing secure access to fiber, and I think there's more work we have to do there.
Thank you both. That does bring our time to an end with this panel. And once again, thank you to our witnesses. Very informative testimony. Also, as we do every meeting, invite you to submit briefs for things that you didn't get a chance to say today. The committee would welcome them. And once again, thank you so much. Colleagues, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we're back with the second panel.
Thank you.
We're back in. Oh, well, thank you. Not everybody thinks so. Colleagues, we're back in session, so if we could get around the table, please. And we're about to hear from our witnesses. I've called the meeting to order for the second panel. Let me, on your behalf, welcome our guests on Zoom. Let me make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses. For those participating by video conference, and there are a number, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Also, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. We have with us this afternoon from the Powerwood Corporation, Jake Power, Managing Director, Dr. Martin Lukert, Professor Emeritus, Forest Economics and Policy from the University of Alberta, and Jeff Bromley, Chair, Wood Council of the United Steelworkers. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. You will each have 5 minutes or less for your opening remarks, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Power. You have the floor for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear. My name, as you mentioned, is Jake Power, and I am the director of Powerwood. We're a value-added manufacturer employing 60 British Columbians. I want to focus my remarks on three themes that matter to the questions this committee is studying. First, speaking to the reality of our export markets. Because of our costs, the characteristics of our forests, logistics, and our limited domestic market, the U.S. will remain Canada's #1 customer for forest products, especially high-value products. No amount of market diversification will change that, and trade certainty in the U.S. should be our #1 priority. Any effort that diverts government resources or messaging away from the U.S. market for political optics ultimately devalues our resource. Our competitive leverage in softwood lumber negotiations comes from a simple fact. U.S. consumers are willing to pay top-of-market prices for Canadian products, even with duties. We are seeing that today. In many of our wood products, the U.S. consumer is paying the lion's share of the duties. Second, policy that can strengthen value-added. I would urge leadership to apply government power where it moves the needle, cost reduction and traceability. There are practical things the government can do that would improve competitiveness at home and support the committee's objectives. The federal and provincial programs that have lowered the cost of capital for companies like ours have made a real difference. When capital becomes affordable, value-added manufacturing has opportunities to grow. I want to acknowledge that support and encourage refining these programs so the money flows to companies that actually manufacture here in Canada. One major area to address is traceability and data that will bring us all in line with the EU's new requirements and provide value at home. Europe's EUDR rules will soon require full traceability back to the stump. Large companies can absorb the cost of tracing. Small and medium value-added manufacturers cannot. Right now, blockchain tracking services are being sold to SMEs at prohibitive prices. In my company, it costs us over $1,000 per container just to meet the tracing obligations. The simplest solution would be for Canada to own the National Forest Products Tracking System and provide access to all businesses. That would level the playing field with large producers, keeping SMEs in the EU market. And finally, give Canada visibility into what happens after the sawmill. Governments already have strong data from forest to mill. But after that, the visibility is not so strong. And I understand that this work is in part underway in Quebec through QWeb. So I just encourage for the development of that so that it can get to the offices of all our entrepreneurial forest products companies. And third, policy choices at home can either support value-added manufacturing or drive them out. There are clear recent examples that have impacted my business that I want to speak to. One, it's not a huge one, but removing the carbon tax on natural gas immediately freed enough cash for our company to hire another skilled worker. It had no impact on our emissions. You know, those emissions are driven by production realities, not tax rates.
Désolé, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, the quality of sound has.
Madam Clerk?
Do you want to suspend?
Yeah.
Not able to hear me?
Let's suspend.
All trade diversification. In our sector, it often means commoditization of wood products that can otherwise support much more productivity here at home. In my career, I've seen how policies meant to diversify markets or encourage innovation sometimes create the opposite effect. In the early 2000s, the push toward China resulted in manufacturing equipment being unplugged in British Columbia and restarted offshore. Today, the same dynamic exists, just with different countries. Our biggest competitor in the U.S. Northeast, it's not another Canadian mill. It's Canadian old-growth fiber shipped to New Zealand, manufactured there, and shipped back into the U.S. 100% duty-free. Our second biggest competitor is Canadian wood routed through U.S. value-added facilities using pricing structures designed to minimize duties. It's leakage. It drains value away from Canadian workers and Canadian manufacturers, and we need federal policy that focuses to defend against it. So I just want to leave you with 2 points in closing. Canada must become relentless about reducing costs for input materials and manufacturing. Productivity should be rewarded, not penalized. Second, Canada must safeguard our market access, especially to the U.S. When government steps too far into the marketing, we can oftentimes create commodities out of specialty products. Canada's forest products are exceptional. When we combine them with competitive costs, direct market access, and real support for value-added investment, our industry can compete anywhere in the world. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Power. We're going to go on to Dr. Lukert. You have 5 minutes or less. Dr. Lukert.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I apologize for not attending in person, but I teach a forest policy class tomorrow morning that I cannot miss. My background in forest policy is largely focused on economic considerations related to the role of governments and how forests are used and managed. As a student of forest policy who tries to embrace the complexities of potential government roles, I will not be so rash as to suggest in a 5-minute brief specific changes to forest policies. Instead, my approach will be to first describe emerging challenges related to the resilience of the forest industry in Canada's forests, and then next I will suggest general policy strategies that the federal government may wish to consider to help face these challenges. In Canada, we have the unusual situation of having over 90% public ownership of forests, yet having private industry largely responsible for harvesting and management, regulated by provincial
Dr. Lukert, if you could just slow down a little bit, that would be appreciated by our interpreters and others. Thanks so much.
I will. Thank you. In Canada, we have the unusual situation of having over 90% public ownership of forests, yet having private industry largely responsible for harvesting and management, regulated by provincial forest tenure arrangements. This situation implies that the resilience of the forest industry and the resilience of Canada's public forests are intertwined. Moreover, with provinces in control of forest tenures, there has historically been little room for federal policies to influence outcomes. However, circumstances have changed the situation markedly, which makes the work of this committee of paramount importance. Central to discussions of forest industry and forest resilience are concerns about the role of climate change in influencing future forests and the role of forests in influencing future climate change. Concerns tend to be focused on the resilience of three sets of values that define sustainable forest management, that is, economic, ecological, and cultural. Climate change can be significantly affected, can significantly affect the profitability of the forest industry because it influences wood supply by affecting ecological processes such as regeneration, insects, and disease, and fire. Responding to climate change is also central to maintaining social license to manage public forests through the effective management of forest resources such as biodiversity and recreation. Though most discussions of resilient sustainable forest management center on considerations of climate change, a more recent and potentially more pressing consideration is the resilience of the forest industry, and therefore forests, to changing trade patterns. The new geopolitical order, or disorder, has enormous implications for the forest industry and beyond. Though trade disputes with the United States over softwood lumber go back to the early 1980s, the level of trade restrictions now being faced is unprecedented and will require a more diversified strategy that will involve new trade flows and alliances. With provincial governments largely in control of forest policy with forest tenure arrangements, federal forest policy has historically had little scope for substantial impact. However, these new sources of volatility clearly overreach the current scopes of provincial tenure policies. Therefore, we are at the beginning of a new era of federal forest policy, where key issues that face the forest industry are more related to federal jurisdictions than ever before. With respect to climate change and carbon considerations, policies are needed to facilitate planning for new dynamics of forests associated with changing climates. Part of this approach could consider how to incent forest managers to include carbon flows in management decisions. A prerequisite for such incentives is to delineate which party, i.e. which level of government or industry, has rights and/or responsibilities to manage carbon. Incentives could come from carbon policies directed specifically at the forest sector or from more general policies that affect numerous sectors, such as biofuel initiatives. Yet another important component is to support research to better understand how alternative forest structures will function and produce under new dynamic conditions, and how life cycles of carbon are impacted. At a global scale, tensions about the role of forests in climate policy continue to indicate an important role for federal involvement. With respect to trade disruptions, diversification away from trade with the United States and diversification towards new products, such as biofuels, will be an ongoing priority. Along these lines, careful attention will needed to be assessed potential policy impacts across sectors, such as how biofuel policies may impact forestry operations. These two emerging areas of challenges have a key characteristic in common that suggests an increasing role for federal forest policy. Neither respect provincial boundaries. Trade considerations are obviously so, but as a case in point for climate change issues, consider the case of wildfire, which has largely been a provincial government responsibility. The fire in Jasper National Park highlighted the need for more coordination between federal, provincial, and municipal governments. Moreover, with Indigenous peoples disproportionately influenced by wildfires, consultation with these governments become even more important. In summary, Canada's forest industry and forests are being increasingly challenged by emerging sources of volatility at unprecedented scales. These larger scales point towards an increasing importance in federal forest policy. However, for the federal government response to be effective, it will be vital that this emerging situation does not result in new attempts at power shifts in forest governments within and between provincial and federal policymakers and Indigenous peoples. Instead, a new era of cooperation and coordination over multiple scales of government will be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lukert. And finally, Mr. Bromley, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee, and like my counterparts, I do apologize for not being there in person. However, I was in meetings here in Vancouver require that I must appear virtually. My name is Jeff Bromley. I am the chair of the United Steelworkers Wood Council. That Wood Council consists of 14,000 members working in Canada's forest industry across 6 provinces, and working in many aspects of the forest industry. Myself have spent 31 years in this industry, 18 years of it in manufacturing, and the last 13 years servicing directly those members across this country. We've had, of those 14,000 members, our membership used to, up until recently, surpass 20,000. And those are 20,000 high-paying, mostly rural, but high-paying, pension-supporting, lots of health and welfare benefit jobs. And the impact of the most recent round of U.S. duties and tariffs of our products going to the States have had a massive impact on that membership, on those communities, and on those families. And I want to, I won't need to reiterate what you've already heard here today in terms of the amount of duties since January 1, 2017, totaling close to $10 billion that the industry is paid into the United States, or paid on the products. But the impact of those duties and the amount of the jobs that have been lost is a direct correlation. While not the only reason for those jobs being lost, it has been an incredible impact. The forest industry in Canada, in my opinion, seems to get a bit of a left out of the conversation when it comes to trade. It certainly garners enough attention, but when it comes to wide-ranging trade agreements, especially with the United States, softwood lumber has always, in my history, been left out, and it's to the detriment of our industry. There is over 220,000 folks that make their living in this industry across the nation. 11,000 of those people are Indigenous. The impact is far-reaching. Even in British Columbia, I'll focus on British Columbia. In our northern local in the Prince George area, that local has seen, or that area has seen, 15 operations close over the last 5 or 6 years, and massive amounts of job loss. And I think that what our government needs to do is focus on making sure that we find a trade deal that supports the industry, and that, because as much as the programs that have been announced in terms of short-term loans for companies that need them, access to them, training to upskill workers to train either in other industries or within the forestry itself, and market development offshore. Those will move the needle somewhat, finding new markets within Canada's forest industry. But it's just the impact of the U.S. demand taking 75% of Canada's forest products is too great for us to be able to pivot enough to move that needle to continue to providing these high-paying jobs. There is opportunities in terms of value added. Many of the members, we talk about softwood lumber, and many of my members across those 14,000 members do produce 2x4s and 2x6s and building products. They also produce massive amounts of value added, whether it be laminated veneer lumber, laminate or plywood, or finger jointed products, or mass timber products. That the markets are expanding, but the opportunities for those jobs to grow are growing at a smaller pace as to what the opportunity of those softwood products going into the United States provide. Our industry is a net carbon sink. So for those who believe that the forest shouldn't be managed, I say that if you do not manage those forests the way the industry does, Mother Nature will manage it for us, and there will be fire, and there will be disease and bugs that will do the damage that we wouldn't do if we were managing those forests properly, and what I believe that our forest industry does. So support of that forest industry across the nation is paramount. And I think that development, as I mentioned, development markets is super important. I think that the procurement and development of government buildings in terms of using Canada wood, I think that's pretty much a no-brainer in terms of any wood products within any government buildings. It has to be for the promotion of the Canadian wood products.
Thanks, Mr. Bromley. Okay. If you'd like to just wrap up, if you had a few more things to say. Okay.
Those are my comments.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bromley. Thank you all. We're going to go to our first round of questions, and we're going to start with Mr. Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Bromley, you were talking about Buy Canadian, and just want to revisit a decision by the Mark Carney government to underwrite the BC ferries in your home province. Would that be an example of a poor policy choice by this government?
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
This has nothing to
Freeze
do
the
with
time.
wood. It's got nothing to do with this
Mr.
government.
Tucker, if you could relate it to forestry, that I think would be helpful.
This is a steel worker, so it is related to
This
it.
study is about forestry.
How much
so
time do I have left?
Lots.
Well, I got 5:51, but okay. All right.
Mr. Tucker, forestry.
So, Mr. Bromley, you were talking about Buy Canadian and the importance of supporting Canadian. We highlighted the BC Ferries debacle where your taxpayers' dollars are underwriting that program. How did your members feel about that?
We heard a comment on directly on how that. I mean, I imagine I don't want to speak for all of my members, but
Or how do you feel?
The Canadians general, listen, I think it's pretty clear that I support using Canadian steel and Canadian products and Canadian wood in all government procurement.
Thank you. I got some questions for you here shortly, but just switching gears over to Mr. Powers. If you could explain it really quickly, the carbon capture idea with forestries. There's some people in the committee that don't understand how this works, but could you, in a minute or less, explain how carbon capture works with wood products for them?
No, it's not my area of expertise. I'd rather not touch on that.
So, but the idea in premise is that if we can lock the carbon into the wood and build something, then that carbon is captured. Is that the essence of what you're referring to?
I wasn't referring to carbon capture in any of my testimony.
Okay. So on the carbon issue, the carbon tax, by removing it, how many employees were you able to hire? Was it one, and you have 20-some employees to start with?
We have 60, and the elimination of the carbon tax saved us enough money to hire a skilled worker.
And that is kind of our point for the last 10 years that we've been fighting against the consumer carbon tax, is that it has hurt companies like yourselves to be able to hire more Canadians and pay better wages. And they've shifted, though, now to the industrial carbon tax, which is more of a hidden tax that would affect different manufacturers. Have you been looking into what, once implemented, an industrial carbon tax at $150 a ton, what would that mean? How many, if the carbon tax was removed at $50 the consumer side and you were able to hire one, what happens when they jack up the industrial carbon tax to $150?
Yeah, I haven't done any research on that specifically. I would expect it would hurt our cash flow. It would reduce our available money to invest here in Canada. And the biggest thing that I pay attention to is just the policy asymmetry, right? If we are paying a carbon tax here, and there's an opportunity for our competitors to ship wood to an offshore location where there's no carbon tax, then that hurts our workers and the environment. And so I don't have any figures for you, but I can tell you that's kind of where I come down on it. Policy asymmetry hurts Canadian manufacturers.
We've heard for weeks now that the tariffs, which is a tax that is being applied to Canadian goods, hurt our industry and our workers, similar to how the carbon tax, for over a decade, the Liberals have implemented one on the consumer side, has hurted workers and paychecks throughout Canada, and policy does matter. Talking a little bit about policies from government and picking winners and losers, you would say that the government shouldn't be making decisions on who succeeds in business. Would that be fair?
I didn't say that, so I'd rather not.
No, I said that, though. So it's the idea that policy does matter. And when governments do pick winners and losers, more times than not, they pick losers.
I would rather look at it as a metaphor of using policy to pick winners and losers becomes a game of whack-a-mole. And unfortunately, you try and pick one winner and it hurts someone else, and you have to whack it somewhere else. And I think that's the softwood lumber dispute is a great example of that, right? We want to they're picking winners and losers in the U.S. using the softwood lumber dispute. And my example of now the wood gets shipped to New Zealand, right? And then all the way back around through the Panama Canal and just adds tons of costs. They don't get any tax money from that, but they get a winner of a company in New Zealand who is totally different from the original intention of it. So I would just say, when government gets too deep in the weeds in policy, it creates that whack-a-mole.
Action is worse for the planet. Where that example where the Liberals have pushed production offshores those ships are burning diesel to bring the same products that we used to make back to Canada, and a net result is no reduction in emissions.
Mr. Power seems to be frozen on the screen. We'll just
I got
suspend for a
frozen.
second. Yep.
2 minutes.
Yep. We'll freeze your time.
It's a folly to think that Europe's going to backfill our products. You said that focusing away from the States would not be the right choice. Can we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, and I don't want to say that the efforts to focus at other markets are a bad decision. There's certainly opportunity in other markets, but stealing resources that help add value or increase the price that we can command in the U.S. would be a unintended consequence of that. And I know we want to be seen to be supporting other markets that aren't attacking us, but like we've seen some of our marketing and product expertise organizations that rely on government funding, they start to lose funding that goes towards the U.S. market and drives the value up in the U.S. and try to have it pushed to other markets. And so I would just caution from that type of behavior, because one of our strongest pieces of leverage in the negotiation with the U.S. is that our products do get some of the highest value out of any product in the U.S. market, and the consumers want them. And so we want to continue to market to those U.S. consumers so that they want those products, so that it gives our negotiators the leverage to say, look, your consumers are paying the duty. You need to come to the table.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Barmley, back to you. Wanting to hear a little bit more about these jobs that are in the sector. These are powerful paychecks that you can raise a family and have a comfortable life. Can you unpack a little bit about how the lives of those workers have been since for the last 10 years in the forestry sector? Are we on a decline of quality of life for those individuals?
It'll have to be a quick response, Mr. Bromley.
Yeah, and my quick response is yes. I believe that it has been impacted. Like I said, most of these, $100,000 a year jobs are in small rural communities, and it's not that you can go down the street in Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto and find another job. It's harder to do, and many of them have to work away or fly into camps, into mines, or find other work elsewhere. So it is certainly a major impact.
Thank you for your public service.
And thank you both. And we are now going to go on to Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Powers. And I've been poking around on your website, and I see that you do a lot of work with Alaska yellow cedar and western red cedar, and other fiber that can include salvage and recovery operations. So what are the main challenges you face in securing predictable, high-quality fiber supply? What changes in forest management, permitting, or incentive programs would best support fuller utilization of wood while still protecting biodiversity and working respectfully with Indigenous rights and title?
Yeah, so I'm not a forester. I don't spend time, logging or creating kind of forest management plans. So I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert on that side. The one thing that is consistent is that our partners up the value chain see is that the costs continue to escalate, and the costs that escalate oftentimes come from long and complicated permitting processes, right? And that is probably the number one driver of cost in fiber procurement, is being able to get a logging plan that is acceptable and approved and get fiber out to facilities like ours. So that would be my number one answer. I think just all these things that we do that drive cost up, we have to remember that there's policy asymmetry, right? If it's great that we want to be the world leader in all these different areas, but as we pursue that, it drives our costs up. and competing regions don't necessarily have those same costs. So all these things we do, these policy initiatives that we take on, we need to ask ourselves, are our competitors doing the same thing? And if not, will it hurt our cost structure?
Okay. You were speaking with Mr. Tucker about softwood lumber dispute and so forth, and tariffs. And of course, there's climate change and policy uncertainty. So how do trade disputes and shifting climate and environmental policies affect your willingness to invest in new equipment, people, and products? And what should we as a Government of Canada focus on to give companies like yours the confidence to invest in the long term in low-carbon wood-based products?
Yeah, I would say that the disincentive to invest in this climate cannot be understated. There's such a strong disincentive to invest in Canada from the softwood lumber dispute, and that becomes a stronger incentive to move existing assets into the United States or offshore. We're seeing it happen. This isn't a new problem. I've been in the industry for 20 years. It was going on long before I joined, and it's continued now because of this continued pressure from the U.S. coalition. Anytime a manufacturer sees the opportunity to move their value-added process across the line to the United States, they take it. It's just as simple as that. And right now, it could not be stronger. Now, there's things the government's already doing, like the programs for creating more access to capital for companies like ours. As I mentioned in my talk, they are important and they do help. The amount they help, it's very small compared to the amount that trade certainty would help. Because we know we can get access to capital that's well priced through loan programs and things like that. That's great. But now I need to take that loan, put in equipment, and know that that equipment will make a profit. And under these trade conditions, oftentimes, if I'm given the equipment for free, I still can't make a profit on it compared to my competitors in different jurisdictions. And so that softwood lumber dispute really is a major disincentive to value-added investment.
So the softwood lumber dispute has been going on since at least '82, I guess, and of course, Mr. Trump said just a few months ago that they have no need of Canadian lumber. They got lots of trees. They don't want to buy our lumber. So that kind of puts us in a disadvantage for negotiating with them. What would you like to see in a softwood lumber agreement? What would help you?
Yeah, and we are a value-added, as you looked at our website, we work on high-value products. It is a very, very different sector of the industry than the commodity big mill 2x4, 2x6 world. And so what I would really like to see is some bifurcation of the way that the agreement looks at different products. I mean, right now, if it's softwood lumber, it gets lumped in and we're paying 45% duties and tariffs. The products I make come from, species and things that they don't have in the U.S. So the consumer, if they want the product, they have to pay it. And just selfishly speaking, for businesses like ours, some type of separation of the high value from the commodity to at least isolate the commodity is the issue. I mean, you look at the duty rate we're paying, they take Canfor and West Fraser and a number of major producers, and they average the dumping that they've done, and they say, okay, we're going to average it in Powerwood, this little company that does specialty products that go into architectural homes. You're paying an average of those. It doesn't make any sense. We're just caught up in the drain, so to speak. So if there was, selfishly speaking, for my business and businesses like mine, if there was some way to separate us from that commodity piece and then allow a conversation about the commodities and have a separate conversation about specialty lumber.
Is that a differentiation on the kind of fiber, or is that the differentiation on the kind of products you produce with that fiber?
Yeah, it can be a little bit of both, right? I mean, it could certainly be the type of fiber. It can be the types of products as well.
Thank you.
That's your time, Mr. McKinnon. We are going to go on to Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes.
Mr. Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to take 3 seconds to make sure that you can hear me. Are you all on the right channel? You can hear the interpretation. Perhaps just nod if you can. Yeah, good. Not. I see that Mr. Luckert is not getting the interpretation. Are you? Can you hear me?
Or to English translation.
We'll We'll suspend for just a few seconds while we work that out. Stand by, Dr.
Mr. Lukert.
Much. Mr. Power, I really appreciated your opening remarks, but I'd like to come back to something that you said so that it's clear and so that it is in our report. If I understood you correctly, it's all very well to work on diversification. It will help your business and your industry. However, you don't feel that we'll be able to replace the American market. I want that to be clear because some witnesses have come to say that it can. Am I putting words into your mouth, or is that what you wanted to say, that you won't be able to just do away with the American market?
You're certainly not putting words in my mouth. I would agree with that statement. That, and I'm sure in some sectors and some businesses they can do away with the American market. My business focuses on architecturally specified wood products, and just the logistical realities of trying to ship those overseas is very difficult. You know, we talked to an architect or a specifier on Monday, and the following week, you know, we've delivered them the product they need. I can't do that in Europe.
Donc, tout à fait. Merci. Je vous dis ça parce que...
Thank you. I understand. That's fine. So perhaps, yes, new markets have to be developed, and perhaps you'll be a little more resilient in the future. However, the answer is not just to replace the market for all the players in this sector. So the efforts of the government should be focused on reaching a deal with the Americans. Now, I don't want to play politics, but in the statements from the Prime Minister, and once again recently, we've seen that they're working on steel, aluminum, energy, but wood and softwood lumber had kind of been left behind. But actually, an agreement, a deal, would allow you to reach the market. Now, there's a proposal that's been going around, and I'd like to hear what you think about it. If the government were to get 50% of those anti-dumping and countervailing duties at the end of each month, and you had access to that, it would help you become more resilient. I know that there is a possibility to use those duties to speculate or use them to develop their business. Do you think it would be good if the government had a program like that that would recover those duties?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately what you're talking about is reducing our costs in through a policy mechanism, right? And that's been, I think, one of the things I'm trying to hammer home here is our costs are exceptionally high, and we pay 45% at the border. So if we were to pay 22.5%, yeah, I would absolutely welcome that. Now, I'm not a policy expert. I don't know what that does to negotiations. But if you're telling me that I could, during my transaction, reduce my transaction costs by 50% at the border, where do I sign, sir?
Vous avez expliqué avec plus.
Well, you've been very frank, and you've said frankly what I was trying to say otherwise. Earlier on, you said something else that I don't think we've ever really given any thought to, or maybe some people have thought about it, but in this committee, we haven't necessarily considered this. That is to say that under a deal, that there be various products that be separated out. So the duties would apply would be different depending on the species, for example. So I've never heard a witness say to us that perhaps we should be thinking about these different kinds of species, because there is wood in the States that is comparable to wood that is produced in Canada. However, there are other species that aren't available there. However, these duties are very, very high, and the cost of producing that kind of lumber is very high. So it would be interesting to be able to, could you just perhaps expand on that idea of separating out certain species?
Used the term whack-a-mole earlier, and that would be always the concern I'd have with, this species or that product. It becomes very difficult for people in policy to do that. During the last softwood lumber agreement, we actually had a mechanism that did just what we're talking about here. It was a first mill requirement, and so you only paid your tariff or your duty, export tax, I think at the time, on the first, the portion that you paid the mill. So if you're a value-added producer, whatever you paid the mill, that's what you paid. And there was also I would call it kind of a speed bump over the print price of the commodity product. You didn't pay any further export tax. That would be a perfect solution for a company like ours. We're competing. We're selling products that are in some cases $10,000 per 1,000 board feet into the United States, and so we're paying duties on that 10,000. I mean, it's a massive amount. But the duties are based on products that sell for $500, $600, $700. And so if the duties were cut off for $600 or $700, then so many of the products that add value wouldn't be as impacted, and the value-added behavior and activity wouldn't be penalized. The problem we have now is it's ad valorem, right? Because it's just a tax at the border. So when I pay my BC Hydro, when I pay my workers, when I pay my property taxes, I am then paying duty on all those to add value, and we have no subsidy. Our value-added producers are not subsidized. At the forestry level, it's beyond my kind of scope. I don't believe there's a subsidy there either, but that it's just a very different mechanism.
Thank you both. Thank you both. We are going to go on to our second round, and we are going to start with Ms. Conants. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really interesting subject, especially for where I live, southern BC, Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. We have towns that are being decimated by the current situation, and I've had many meetings, roundtable, town hall meetings with affected workers and owners of these CAOs. But I think we need to look at the human aspect of what's happening right now. There's a lot of decisions being made from cities and that don't understand what's actually happening in these small towns. And so my first question is for Dr. Lukert. You're teaching your students about forestry, which is the future of that. Is Dr. Lukert, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. It's a future of the industry. I just wondered if you are teaching them the cultural effects of what's happening in these small towns that are having to close, and our families that are being decimated and having to split up. How are you presenting this to your students? In a quick answer, because I know you could probably teach a class on this, but tell me what you're teaching your students about what is actually happening on the ground to these families that are not able to put food on the table.
You're right. That could be the scope of many lectures. But in a nutshell, community stability and community welfare is part of the sustainable forest management paradigm, which the forest industry has been trying to move towards for more than a decade now, away from sustained yield. So culturally and socially, those are considered to be part of sustainable forest management. The difficulties we face there is how to integrate that into the incentive frameworks which industry
just
faces.
To interrupt you, sorry about this, but just want to interrupt because I don't have a lot of time. But so do you think your students understand what's actually happening to these families? I mean, you have to say it's been a lost decade here with the Liberal government's policies on forest products, not so little advocacy, and now we're hitting the brink of that disaster. Do you think your students understand what's actually happening in these small towns?
They understand that there is big concerns over community stability, over the perpetuation of those communities, but they also understand, as a forest policy person, I have to deal with both sides of this. They also understand that that sometimes requires subsidies, and that there are some political decisions which are tough about whether or not you should keep open a mill that doesn't necessarily make it on its own. So there are some serious trade-offs to be considered.
There's a lot involved for sure. Thank you. My next question for Mr. Bromley. I'm hearing across BC that many mills and from the mills, from the workers and from the mill owners and CEOs, managers, that they've had to cut back on their shifts. For example, in my riding, Grand Forks actually closed their mill or shut it down. Now they're to one shift, but the people are very scared who live there and are looking at their options, possibly leaving the town, hopefully not. But so has I'm hearing that what discussions has the United Steelworkers had with the Government of Canada about threats to future job losses in the sector?
Well, actually, last week, we actually had meetings with various MPs in terms of the impact and the job loss. And in your example in Grand Forks is one of our mills. It's the Interfor mill there that was down for a couple of months. Thankfully, recently they announced that they were bringing back one shift with about half the workforce came back. But we were in the midst of trying to negotiate transfer agreements, so some of those folks, those members, those workers could commute and work over in Castlegar at the sister mill Interfor there. And nonetheless, we didn't have to because of they came back. But I think that's temporary. And so what we've been talking to the Canadian government about, the federal government about, is that we are hitting a crisis mode here in terms of the manufacturing part of things. And the levers about loan guarantees and the stuff that I mentioned previously about the announced programs that of recently by the federal government is really good. However, I don't know if it goes far enough. I think there's got to be an immediate need for expanded EI access so that these folks don't miss mortgage payments, or they don't miss car payments, or they don't, as you put it, miss putting food on their table, because it is. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Thank you. Colleagues, so we have Mr. Gay for 5, Mr. Simard for 2.5, and then we're going a little over time. We had a couple of interruptions, as you know. So, Mr. Rowe and Mr. Danko, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes each, probably time for a question and a response, and then we will end the meeting. So, Mr. Gay, you have 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to be with us today. Mr. Power, just a comment. I would invite you, I really like your idea of traceability and making it affordable for all, depending on the size of the company. So if you want to submit your proposal to the committee, that would be much appreciated. I have a question for Dr. Lockhart. Dr. Lockhart, in terms of forest management practices, which I'm sure is also part of your curriculum, I have a couple of questions. How can the federal government assist? And also more specifically on the mulching, what do you think about that, and is that a good practice?
For the first one, the role of the federal government in forest management practices, that is going to be a tough one because, as you're probably aware, the provincial governments are in control of almost all of the regulations and the rights and responsibilities associated with forest management. The only place that I can see where there's a clear government responsibility has to do with helping to assign carbon values and how those will be integrated into the policy, because that's clearly it has some clear federal connections. So working with the provinces about how carbon would be integrated into forest management is a big consideration. It's something which does not happen right now for the most part, which might trickle in through some other policies, but understanding exactly how to get carbon into forest management is not something which we know something about the flows, but we don't know how to make incentives for tenure holders to do that.
And I guess it's sort of related. If I ask you a question about biomass, there's some estimates out there that biomass production should triple by 2030 compared to 2021 level. How do you think the country is positioned to meet this demand and participate in this source of energy? And what risk might there be for us?
So when you talk about biomass, I assume you're talking about it as an input for biofuels. Is that correct? Yes. That is a $1 million question with respect to the potential future role of forests. We've done quite a bit of work on this, and it starts out from very good footing in that right now a lot of slash is burnt and released into the atmosphere, and forest companies actually have to pay to do that. So not only are we not capturing potential value there, but it's actually costing forest industry money to do that. The problem is that the technology to turn that into ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, is still very, very expensive. There's some tough decisions to be made about what types of incentives to put in place if you want to start an infant industry in that direction. There's some tough decisions about whether or not that's a good bet for the government. Some people have been talking about winners and losers. But it is an area where there is a lot of forest biomass out there, which right now sits on the ground. It contributes sometimes to wildfire. It sometimes contributes to coarse woody debris and ecosystem functions of the forest. So there's a lot of decisions there about carbon flows and about what the best use of that is and what the technology might be to be able to do that. Right now, I would say it's way too expensive, but figuring that out as technology improves will be important.
Mulching in forest management.
I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by mulching in forest management, but if you mean grinding up residue from harvest to go back into the forest floor, that's very ecosystem specific as I understand it. For example, in Alberta here, most of that is piled and burnt, as I was just explaining, because the mulching isn't as good for that type of an ecosystem where they're growing aspen. So it depends very specifically. I'm not an expert in silvicultural practices, but it depends very specifically on the type of forest you're talking about and what those uses or what you're trying to grow there and resources you're trying to promote.
Quick question to Mr. Bromley. You actually mentioned that 11,000 people, part of your union, are Indigenous. Did I understand correctly? And is there any example or model that you've seen of partnership and ownership with them that you're aware of?
Quick answer, Mr. Bromley.
Yeah, quickly, of the 220,000 people that make their living in the industry, 11,000 are Indigenous, not of the 14,000 members of mine. And partnerships, there's lots of them. We could spend a lot of time. Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan, out on the Vancouver Island of the Coast, the Huayat First Nations all have partnerships within harvesting. Meadow Lake's actually a wholly owned sawmill.
Thank you.
There's lots of examples we could use.
Thank you. Thank you both. Monsieur Simard, 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Simard, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Power, I just want to go over something very quickly with you. In your opening remarks, you referred to the problems you've had with the workforce and that it isn't predictable anymore. So I'd like to know if you use temporary foreign workers. So because you mentioned that it's difficult to keep people, why is it?
Excellent track record for retention. The challenge that we have is with attendance, and the rates of attendance have shifted dramatically in the last 5 years.
Merci. Monsieur Bromley.
Thank you. Mr. Bromley, you know, in many sawmills in Quebec and in pulp and paper mills, there have been several temporary layoffs. And so for many people, the best thing is employment insurance for those who have these temporary layoffs. But some people have raised the possibility to have a program like the one that we had during the pandemic. That is to say, the salary support measures that were taken that allowed people to be able to get through that transition, the workers' benefit. Do you think that's something that might be useful to the forestry sector?
Oui, je crois certainement parce qu'en termes de l'assurance chômage en ce moment, le maximum que l'on peut aller chercher est 55% de salaire. Ça peut être environ 135 $ par semaine. Les emplois syndiqués que je représente et pour d'autres seraient à peine 40 ou 45%. Donc, lorsque les travailleurs doivent avoir accès à l'assurance emploi, ça a vraiment un impact important sur leurs revenus. Merci. Merci à vous deux. Nos deux dernières questions sont pour M. Rowe.
Wrap you up after 2.
All right. I had my time cut down a little bit, so I'm going to ask the big question, the one of life or death. 15 operations closed in Canada, I believe you said, Mr. Bromley, and that just surprised me. And, where are those jobs going? What other countries are they going to? And we heard from our last witness a lot of stuff is coming from Brazil and other countries. And my father's a part of Local 579 Carpenters Union, and I work alongside of many unionized trade workers, and there's a high level of safety in the workplace and high level of workplace harassment prevention amongst unions, second to none in Canada and throughout the world. So much so, I'm a firm believer Canada has some of the safest working conditions in the world. And whether it be through policies that unions have, but also regulations that the government have. And would you like to share the benefits of having wood products that come from Canada, where there's much safer regulations more than any other country that we may not see in other places?
Well, the economic benefit, the quality of the fiber in Canada, I believe, is bar none. And I mean, if you do a direct comparison with Southern Yellow Pine in the United States that competes with Canadian softwood products, you ask anybody who's building a house, it'll be, or any type of product or a structure, they'll want to use our products. They're in demand. In terms of safety in the workplace, that's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I've negotiated safety language. We monitor it closely, and we try to make our workplaces the safest in the jurisdiction. And just to your earlier question, those 15 facilities were in northern BC alone, not across Canada. I could add on more if there was, but that was in northern BC.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot. And, I just think our lumber and across our industries have a lot less blood on our industry than what we see in other countries. And my next question is for Mr. Power. You mentioned we sell raw product to other countries. Then they sell it to the U.S. and other markets, competing against our own companies, causing economic drain. Is there a larger markup on the manufacturing side rather than the raw economics? And are there more jobs in that industry that we're losing? Like I'm being told we lost 6,000 jobs since 2014, and 30% of those have been in the past 6 months. That's 2,000 in the past 6 months. Is a big part of the jobs that we're losing and the investment leaving from Canada in that secondary manufacturing?
Yeah, really quick, Mr. Power.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you sell the raw product without doing the manufacturing, you're losing all those jobs. We had an export tax added in BC to stop the raw material of certain products in 2021, and my company, we've been able to hire 40 people since then.
Thank you.
All in secondary manufacturing.
Thank you. Wrapping up, Mr. Danko for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So, of course, the softwood lumber dispute has been a 40-year conflict with successive governments, both liberal and conservative, to their credit, addressing this issue, winning trade disputes at the tribunal level, and refusing to capitulate to the U.S. In the current context, it was just announced $500 million in financing and credit supports for the softwood lumber industry, a 50% cut to rail transportation costs, combined with the government's Buy Canadian policies, infrastructure spending, housing spending, creating a truly Canadian market for Canadian forestry products. So in the time that I've left, I would ask, maybe starting with Professor Luckert, if there's any areas of optimism that you see for the Canadian softwood lumber industry in the future.
That's a tough one. When I look at the current trade environment that we're facing, I put it at a bigger magnitude in terms of disruption than the COVID epidemic. Because the COVID epidemic lasted 2 years or so, this one could last much, much longer. Even if Trump gets put down by the Supreme Court with his trade decisions, there's a long history of the ITC and ITA having political influence anyway. And you talked about us winning over the past 4 decades, I'm not so sure we were winning. We weren't losing as bad as we're losing right now with the current tariffs. But we have been paying tariffs for a very long time.
Yeah.
And we have lost decisions with the ITC and the ITA, and even when NAFTA and GATT gave us the thumbs up.
Yeah.
So
I'll
it's been a
allow
political process.
a quick response from the other two, if you wish. And Mr. Bromley?
And in terms of fairness, in terms of the market, Canada traditionally has about 30% of the U.S. market in terms of those products. It's now dwindled to about 23. That's 7%. That demand in the U.S. market is still there. Where it's being filled from, largely from the European Union, so who enters the market almost tariff free.
Mr. Power, any last word?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Luckhertz put a good nail on the reason not to have optimism in the near term. You know, if you zoom out over decades, we have some of the best forest growing conditions on the planet. We have, as Mr. Bromley alluded to, some of the safest and highest standards of workplaces on the planet, and we have a country that people around the world want to deal with. So we have a lot going for us. But if you zoom in on the current decade, I don't see a lot of reason for optimism, absent the trade deal.
Yep. Thank you all for your excellent testimony. Thank you, colleagues, for good questions, a good exchange today. And that is bringing our meeting to an end. But just before we go, I want to remind members that the deadline to submit your witnesses to the clerk for the energy study is this Friday, December 5th at 5 p.m. And this is our final meeting of the forestry industry study. Next meeting, we will be giving drafting instructions to the analysts for the report on this study. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.